afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for coming to this afternoon's Taste of the Arts lecture series. Today we are very honored to have Xenia Fedorchenko from Lamar University. She is here to talk about our two current exhibitions, JOOYOUNG, Big Time Dreaming in the Age of Uncertainty, and Jules Jones, Future Fossils. So we thank you for coming. Xenia is going to speak about both exhibitions, and once she's done, we'll have a Dutch-style lunch in the cafe, so if you'd like to join us for that, it will be great. So I'm going to introduce Xenia really quickly. Xenia joined the art faculty at Lamar in 2006, so she is currently a professor of color theory, drawing, and printmaking. She received her Master of Fine Arts in Printmaking from Southern Illinois University, and her Bachelor of Fine Arts in Painting from Lime Academy, College of Fine Arts in Connecticut. In addition to having taught figure drawing and intaglio classes at Southern Illinois, Ms. Fedorchenko also worked as a printer of intaglio and lithographic editions at Milestone Graphics in Bridgeport, Connecticut. She is represented by Water Street Studio, also in Bridgeport. Her work is in the permanent collections of several museums, as well as university, corporate, and private collections throughout the country. We're very honored to have her today, and I'm going to hand off. She doesn't want to use the microphone, but she does.
We'll try it without the mic. Can everybody hear me?
Oh, yeah.
I was hoping so. Okay, so today is an informal talk, and I would like to begin it by saying that, hi, my name is Xenia Fedorchenko, and I have problems. And thank you for coming here and walking with me through them. Right, well, first of all, like some of you, many of you, I came to see the opening of this exhibition and got to actually meet and interact with the artists. So let me start by describing what I saw. Well, the first thing I noticed walking into the opening reception was JOOYOUNG, the artist for this exhibition. And the reason I noticed her instantly is because she was wearing a traditional dress of her birth culture, right, Korea. And so she was very bright, and instantly the first thing I noticed was that she was different from Southeast Texan culture and what we normally expect from local artists, right? And then she proceeded to give a talk. And the talk was obviously about this series of work, which is this very personal, very complex cosmology, right? Or this kind of made-up view of the world, almost mythologized, which all, for her, in the talk, seemed to stem from the personal trauma she experienced from her intercultural adoption, right? So these works are kind of meant as a way for the artist to deal with and perhaps cure this personal trauma. And in her talk, she explained some of these figures going on. Obviously, we're looking at very dense wall pieces. And it turns out that they have names and there are kind of backstories to all of them, right? So it's not just what's represented, but there's this huge mythology of what's not really there. And she talked about how in making this work and producing this work, it's become a very positive experience in meeting new people. She said new friends on the journey, and it was a really nice positive message of kind of inclusiveness and community. And at the end of her talk, I think I wasn't the only one that wanted to give the artist a hug and all of us in the audience a hug, because everything was great and smiley and it felt wonderful. And then of course, here comes me with my problems, right? So, problems. Oh no. So looking at the language of art and the materials used, right? Let's just talk about what's on the wall. These two-dimensional large pieces utilize just an excessive amount of patterning. Pattern on top of pattern, right? There are all of these bright unmixed colors. There are all of these figures. There's a very ambiguous relationship between figure and ground, where all the figures, some are on top of others, and the background is so active and so patterned, it kind of prevents the viewer from entering the piece, right? There's not that kind of illusionistic sense of depth and space. nor am I as a viewer able to really contemplate anything, right? It's really dense. I have trouble focusing on just one thing. On top of that, you know, without knowing the artist's personal iconography, I can't really relate to any one of the figures. I don't know their story, they're hers, right? And some symbols are very recognizable and very easy to see, like that first piece on the wall at the entrance to the exhibition obviously presents a classical cosmology with something built on top of the turtle's back, right? The kind of historical reference back to cosmologies. Also in the bottom of the panel you have all of these kind of hellish, tortured, very pale figures overlapping each other that are very reminiscent of the figures used by Hieronymus Bosch. So like, oh yay, maybe an art historical connection, maybe not, right? Because they're, again, all of these symbols used all over the place. So density, ornamentation, this kind of obsession with including everything rather than editing down the content. All of these things, so it's also very decorative and flat, right? With the brightness of the background competing with the brightness of the figures. And the figures are patterns themselves, so patterning, obsession, repetition, the build-up, all of these things. I've been, you know, I'm an academically trained artist. What am I going to think? Oh, outsider art. Obsession, collection, patterning, repetition. Dense personal mythology that is not clear to the outside viewer, that there's also this kind of authority, right, to where these pieces, these works don't really care what I think. They don't care to give me peace. They don't care to give me one explanation. They just exist in their own world. Outsider art, right? Huh? And of course, then there's this whole thing about, oh, well, you know, part of outsider art production, there's also naive artists. Naive artists being maybe not educated in the academic sense, and they just don't know the conventions. Naive artists, right? They don't know to mute down the background so I can have a sense of depth. Who knows? There's also faux naive artists. And I don't know why I'm up here instead of Dr. Chadwick, who bases a lot of her work on Dubuffet, let's say, right? Faux naive artists who knowingly use this kind of outsider art language, or language common to outsider artists, to what? Well, usually there's some kind of subversion of convention or the institution or something like that going on, right? That makes sense. I'm not happy with the way academic art is. Let me bring my voice in by using this other language very intentionally and subverting the viewer's kind of expectations. Perhaps that's what's going on. I mean, let's look, right? Because on one hand, at first I was like, well, why are they on canvas, these big two-dimensional pieces? Is there any reason for them to be collaged on canvas, other than for them to suddenly look like gallery pieces? Perhaps, but look, she's very, very, very aware and guiding me to the fact, oops, I didn't, to the fact that this might happen, right? She's deconstructing the canvas over there. She's guiding me to ask these questions. Like, what is happening with this outside? She is aware of her materials. She is obviously educated. She mentioned her education in the fine arts several times in her talk, which at the time I kept being like, why does she keep talking about? So I'm not giving answers. I'm just going to keep pushing a little bit, right? So then there was this aspect where of JOOYOUNG's work, where she talked about the importance of community engagement. And there was this wonderful workshop held by AMSED where community artists were invited to help participate, produce this piece, this exhibition, right? To where people could come in and make flowers or make, what else did you guys make? Just the flowers. Authorship, well, no, we're not. One problem at a time, right? So, what is that about? Instantly my mind goes, again from my kind of academic background, I start thinking about well-known contemporary women artists that are using kind of woman-produced and socially engaging practices as their work, right? So I start thinking about, you know, Anne Hamilton, that is trying to elevate women's work, so which usually gets dismissed as craft, like embroidery, sewing, things like quilting, which, by the way, colors, look at the colors. So kind of trying to bring these overlooked practices into the institution of high art. But with Anne Hamilton, everything is scripted. Everything is very, very controlled, and there's a certain amount of a precision of craft that happens. Okay? And I'm just going to kind of leave it there, and just bear with me. The other thing that I looked at with that is this collaging aspect, and how collage, rather than painting as a visual language, has been repeatedly used by many artists. And you know, normally there's some kind of attention being paid to the edges of the collaged materials and how they all relate. Here, I walk up and some things are peeling, there's goops of things hanging out between the edges. So obviously, the elevation of craft is not the point, despite the materials and the language used. So anytime I try to read this work in one manner, in one way, to explain it away and go, this is what it is, I got it. It defies me, it denies me, it just kind of kicks me right out. I'm not feeling included, oh my God. No. So the other thing, of course, is the materials themselves. So there's acrylic paint, there's obviously crafting felt, the forms are very accessible, the materials are very accessible, we're not in high art materials. So kind of again, like anything goes. Outsider art, for naive art, why in the world? Why? What is represented? And the artist talked about how she grew up in this culture, in this country, and obviously had gone back to Korea and seen like children's programming, etc., etc. And certainly there's a lot of kind of cultural ephemera that's represented in all of these works, right? So even for me, and I didn't speak English as I was growing up, so I didn't understand a lot of the cartoons happening. But as she was talking, I was like, wait, that looks like the chair in Pee-wee's Playhouse. And there's something about Rainbow Bright, but I don't know, that was one of my younger brother's toys in there, right? And the bright colors. Obviously, there's Dorothy. Dorothy, right? Wizard of Oz? Yeah. The Soviet Union, they had plagiarized it, and she had a different name. She was Ellen. Anyway. So looking at all of these kind of things where, okay, this is the artist's culture now, and the artist is inclusive, and this is for everyone, and the point of art is to make you feel better and cure your personal trauma. I don't know, right? And then anytime I was like, oh, it is about culture, it is about immigration, it is about, because I got to ask the artist a couple of questions, and one of my questions was, what's next? And she said, next is a series of works about representing the underrepresented in art. And I said, yes, that makes sense, finally, we have it. It's about making those characters that we've all seen in popular culture resemble each and every one of us, right? Or at least the artist. And the artist is in all the works too, which also precludes me from entering because it does become even more personal to her. So, those are my problems. I think I've covered most of them in this room. What is my solution? I don't think we're subverting the institution here. I don't think we're subverting high art. I think we're doing something kind of, I don't want to say, and I don't want to say this is original or new or different because, again, there's so many people that have practiced in a similar manner. Ooh, I also want to talk about sculpture, but talk about it in the next room. So, is it just a different generation? Is it, what is it? Is it the artist as a kind of cultural curator? Anyway, let's keep walking before I lose my train of thought entirely. So, Jules Jones. Exhibition of works on paper and canvas. In one room they're framed, in this room it's more of an installation question mark. And it is site-specific as it was assembled here. The artist does teach in the academic environment, so we know we're not faux naive. Right? Future fossils, makes sense. We all go extinct, it's about the cycles of life. Great. With that, there's also the cycle of life of the materials used. So the paper used is very brittle, it's fragile, it's not going to last forever. It too will be a future fossil. I don't know if this foam will endure after the planet ends, but this figure obviously meant to remind us all of a typical Museum of Natural History display, right? So, ready for problems or should I keep going? Problems. So if we're talking about, oh God, I don't want to use the word ontology. Okay. Let's back up to the sculpture or three-dimensional work, right? So in terms of sculpture, especially sculpture made utilizing non-traditional materials. So whom am I thinking about? Let's say Oldenburg.
Birch.
Oh, okay. No, I was thinking more like, sometimes, okay, so why would you do that? Why would you make a sculpture to look like something else made out of non-traditional high art materials? Huh? Budget.
To claim it.
Wait. To claim it. Wait.
To give it new life.
To give it new life?
Recycle.
Ah, that would be nice. Right? Would it be to investigate space easier? Perhaps. Or to somehow once again create it as commentary on the traditional and non-traditional. In this case, I think that's kind of what's going on. I've explained it away, no further problems. Goodbye, everybody. So this is meant to be like a typical anthropological museum display, right? Do you guys love anthropological or natural history museums?
Yeah.
I do. I love them to death, right? And I'm lucky enough to where I get to take students to Italy, and we go to La Specola, which is one of the oldest museums that collects, right? All of these museums are supposed to collect and organize what we know of the natural world, right? And at each point in time, each museum is representing the kind of height of knowledge for that time. And this is meant to be like them. And if you've been in those museums, you've seen how a lot of what they present as fact or knowledge is in fact neither. So it's kind of like culturally and historically specific way of viewing the world. So the way they categorize things. They might have miscategorized a butterfly as something else, as a moth, who knows, right? A lot of times to us, contemporary viewers, it makes no sense at all. So, here's what we see. We see animals. The artist talked about how in these panels we have drawings kind of relating to more of a regional or a local environment, right? Great. And he talked about how those are also all animals that exist nearby, and they look like they've been hunted down, killed, and mounted, right? Those heads. And then there's this kind of natural world patterning, meant to resemble the local flora and fauna. And then there's this layered stuff that's going on in the central panels. So it's all thrown together. Not all of these animals live at the same place, and generally there's those that are already extinct and those that will be extinct. Great. It all makes sense. So let's talk about the actual presentation, right? Because normally from a museum, I would expect what? Wall texts, some kind of diagrams explaining to me as a viewer, guiding me into what I'm supposed to think. There's none of that, right? Scientific displays also tend to be very clean, almost antiseptic, because you want to present the information as fact. Versus here, how much of a fact is an artist's hand, right? And it's all very personal art making. So this is kind of anti-fact. Very loosely shaped paper, I can see the scissor marks, and very loose mark making. And the artist actually, Jules, talked about how he's constantly forcing himself to not get too tight or too predictable with his mark. And you can see that there's a couple of spots where I almost got angry at looking at them, right? Like as an artist, right? Because you want to see that language of drawing explored, and you can see him in spots starting to like stipple or shade very precisely. And it's almost like you can see the artist kicking himself and then being like, no, step away from it, do it looser, do it faster, do it. Again, anti-fact, anti-careful study. These are not merely drawings from direct observations or studies of anything, right? So fact, not fact. Also, the amount of information presented, right? Although reminiscent of places like the Specula, it's a lot. You can't sort through it, right? Visually, I'm still like just being in this room and talking, trying to identify different elements, and I can't. My visual apparatus cannot handle the amount of stuff here. So problems. Is this a critique of how information is presented? Think about also how paper, right? Normally, if we present as artists, again, academic stuff, if you present an unframed drawing, it's because you want that nature of the paper, which is very overtly here, paper. It's not trying to be an actual thing. How that paper moves, how it holds creases, it's fragile, it's unprotected. Here it is, except it's pinned through. maybe like bug displays or whatever. Maybe not. So, I don't know. Those are my problems. I'm so sorry if anyone walked in without problems. But I think it's good to just basically, in looking at art, ask yourself, what am I seeing? How am I seeing it? How are the processes used? Why are these materials used? What are they trying to do? Are they just there because someone just didn't think about it? Doubt it. It's a little too much commitment to just do it, right? I've come to an end of thought, and I can't remember other thoughts, so I'm going to call it done. How long was that?
Do you want to take questions?
Yeah, I would love to take
Does
questions.
anybody have any questions?
Answers, give me answers.
I'd just like to say that both these exhibits deal with no sense of timeline. Number one, this exhibit deals with that play on that. This is a remnant, even if we saw the fossil, it's a void that's then infilled. And so the remnants, he's playing back that whole idea of what's left in the environment to even know anything about history or context.
That's true.
And then the marking styles, there's 5 major marking styles in the whole project. There's formal studio art that was done in the studio of above and some of these elements here. He brought those, but knowing that he was inlaying them and they were causing him to create the other handmade diagrams that he did in place. So even context of time, we're seeing 3 different places of context, the generation of the work.
That's nice. Tell us more. What else?
Is the sculpture styrofoam, actually? And
Yes,
that's
the sculpture is carved styrofoam, and it's coated in rhino liner, truck bed liner material they use for truck bed.
And you might want to know where the context, this was part of a major exhibition in Austin under a bridge. It was suspended and part of a major, this was thrown away styrofoam that was used basically on roof projects and things like that. And he said, I must have a purpose for this, and it transitioned into this.
Well, and to kind of expound on that, the styrofoam actually came from the drought in Lake Travis in Austin. So it was, I think, a 40-year
The
drought.
docks.
So all of the boat docks that were now void of any use because there was no water, and they had no idea when there would be water, possibly never. There was all this styrofoam. So it was kind of reclaimed in a way because there was just
Piles of it.
yeah, tons, literally, of styrofoam. So when he was going through and carving it, he would actually find some kind of nestled bugs and, barnacle, murder life.
But see, that's all part of the problem, right? Is what are we looking at? How much does the outside information, so that background information of when, what was done, have to do with our reading of the work versus just kind of walking in and feeling it, and all the whys.
I keep thinking of something that just keeps going through my head. All that remains is enough. All that remains is enough is plenty.
It really is, yeah. Elsa? Yeah.
I'm so sorry. Did you have something to say?
No, go for it.
Okay, I had a comment actually on this exhibit over here. You guys were talking about how background, knowing information of the artist kind of, shapes the way you perceive the piece. And I was looking at, I don't really know what you would call it, but it's that large figure that is carrying the little girl. It's also in that picture over there, and what that kind of seems like to me, that's kind of that parental figure of, someone who was adopted who doesn't really know who they had as a parent. And it's like, if you look at the faces, a lot of them are very sad, some are very happy. And it's that constant inner turmoil that probably you feel of like the whys and the sadness, maybe the happiness. And I thought it was really interesting when she said that she'd been adopted. Because it makes sense why it's like a little girl, it's like that dream of having someone to, be your nurturer or your caretaker. And it's like you don't really know how you feel. And so that just really impacted me.
Everyone, right? super involved and personal, but what does it do? Does it elevate the work? Does it lessen the work? Why would the artist choose to sell chunks of her production?
Community involvement again.
Community involvement again.
The inclusion.
Inclusion.
And remember that she borrowed pieces back for this exhibit.
Here, you can buy it, but can I borrow it to show? This is true, yeah.
Also recycling, she used all the leftovers to.
That's true, from making the big sculpture. It's all in here. So I'm proposing the institution of art has changed on some level.
But every time you display a piece of your artwork, you are giving away a piece of yourself, or you're selling a piece of yourself.
Ouch. It's a good one.
I thought the rocks are kind of the selling of the aura of being an artist, because they have those scraps on the inside. That means they were touched by the artist, they were part of her process, and now you too can get like the aura
scraps.
and the vibe of art, and it gives you power.
But you don't know what they're
You are part of the holy
Yeah.
shamanistic practice
Yeah.
of art making.
I find it very shamanistic.
Well, and the added kind of goal of these is to inspire creativity, right? They have a mission, these potato rocks.
Right, but that's the
to-
question,
to
is
shape
what
them.
is the mission? Yeah.
There's, there's intention, the artist has intention with the object, but what
To promote
happens after
inclusion
that?
too. She's welcoming you into her world by making these, and you can be a part of my world by having pieces of it.
I think it also might into advertising. She really wants to include everybody in her world, but if you have a rock, you can explain where it came from and who it is, and then maybe go look her up and see what it means.
So like I said, I would be, I'm just here to ask questions.
Or a different, a soft sculpture for sure, but instead of a book, you have something else more tactile than just flat pages. And a memory, you said everybody wanted to hug her after the end, and you have that, and you think back to that feeling of being in that presentation.
So it's art as experience.
Mhm.
It's a memento of an experience. Okay.
Remembering that Warhol did that over and over again,
Okay.
and his events that he'd have, and surprise people at the event with something, whether it be a Polaroid or whatever.
Mhm.
That was a part of the event to remember it by.
Yeah, the giveaway. But again, that takes some of the awe away, right?
Oh, yeah.
To put it into context. Dang it. There was another point that I actually forgot, now that we're talking. In the video, the artist presents herself as T.S. Watson, I believe. I made the horrible mistake of Googling T.S. Watson. Because the video is so cute. It's like animation, there's like some background stuff that flashes in and out, but like, I wasn't really sure exactly what I'm flashing to. This T.S. Watson came up as one of these foremost guys in a British society from the 1800s it was a society of artists and scientists promoting the British Empire through art. And just kind of that popped up, because I was like, what an interesting name. Sounds like some kind of British colonialist dude. Why is the artist calling her, but whatever. Could be that, could be coincidence.
So she wants to take over the world with her.
I don't know. I don't know. Ah!
I have a question.
Yeah,
Do you
I
have
have
a
no
lot of,
answers. Yeah.
you have a lot of students and artists and people that love arts. Is it a problem to have problems?
No, I think it's positive. Thank God for problems. If there was no difficulty, if there was nothing to think about, to digest, what would be the point?
I think that's important for them to know that problems is not a problem. I think I have a beautiful story. Sandy, next to you, I came to a lecture and I was having so much trouble doing a project. And she said, art is to solve problems. And that I really took to heart. But now from you, I'm learning that art itself is problems. I don't think it's a bad thing.
No.
So I want everyone, especially the students, that it's okay to have problems. To not be afraid to not be outside the box and do it wrong. One of my favorite things as an artist is that if I don't know the rules, I'm not afraid to break them because I don't know them. So that kind of gives me that permission.
Yeah.
But the more you study and learn, then you realize that you're probably doing it wrong, but you still keep doing it.
But see, that's another discussion with outsider artists. It's like, because there is something where we see this other language that is brighter and happier and obsessive and just interesting to look at, and we tend to dismiss it as like, oh, well, it doesn't follow the rules, or it breaks the rules, or it's somehow less than the high art. But I think it's, at this point, can be just different and somehow layered with what had existed, which is no longer as pertinent, maybe.
I would like to address new and unusual materials, not classic sculptural materials. Raise your hand if you own a marble sculpture or a 500-pound piece of bronze.
Ooh, not 500.
Not even Rob. Who owns as much art as anybody I know that's not a museum.
Rob is a museum.
There's only so much students could afford, and I'm going to tell you, sadly, when you're out of school, you can probably afford even less, because you'll have to have better things because you're now out of school. But all sculptors are moving away from that stuff, because bronze,
Expensive.
unless you know people, you have to pay people to A, make a mold, B, cast it, C, clean it up, D, that's next, polish it, and E, deliver it back to you. And how much do you think that costs? Beyond the $2 a pound. I don't know what bronze weighs anymore because I have an insider deal. But I haven't cast bronze in a lot of years. And my bronze is like this big, not this big. And styrofoam is, you drive by it on the street and you go, well, I could make something out of that easily. And even if you don't, I grew up down the highway from Dow Chemical in Midland, Michigan. And you know how the paper plants used to give away paper? Dow Chemical gave away styrofoam sheets. Big sheets, big pieces of styrofoam all over the place. Every Cub Scout had, like a 4x8 sheets worth or something like that. But there's also the possibility that if you want to work on something, if you wanted to cast something that big, I'm going to tell you that it requires friends. And usually friends need a little money, or at least feeding and beer. So you go on to a different material. So there are investigations of other unusual materials. There's if you don't know, you're kind of a little younger than I am. But if you don't know, there is a large iron casting community amongst sculptors, because that's like 5 cents a pound, and we've also found a foundryman who thinks holidays in your mold are really cool things, because he's charged with this does not X-ray out as usable oil field materials. He's just making valves and it has to be perfectly cast. And if it isn't, you have to break it up and run it back through and do it all over again. But if a piece of my sculpture comes out with half of the casting, I might say, what do I want to make the rest of this out of? Maybe I'll use a different material. Because I have all the possibilities, and the Founderman has none. But there are lots of other materials. Why use big, enormous paper? Probably because it's really cheap. Because canvas is not. And even the canvas stuff here is pretty big.
Yeah,
You know.
but if you wanted to really make it about science in this digital age, it would look very different. So I don't think it's just because
Yeah, you
of the
can.
availability of materials that either of these artists are doing this. Because I think if this was really meant to be a scientific-like display, it could be. It's not that.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't care.
I think he did care.
It wasn't about science.
I want
It's
you
about
to
the
read to our
experience.
students, I want you to know how great your history lessons are. Your professor has been lightly quoting and talking about things about art history. I mean, my references, after hearing her talk, I'm looking at this, and I'm thinking about Goya's work in the Tarmagia. And if you go back and look at them, the references there, most people didn't understand it, but then he had these subversive messages. And that's what's happening here. Please study your art history. It will stay with you the rest of your life, and you will enjoy that.
Okay,
Thank you.
should we eat?
And I also, thank you very much, Xenia. And also in our, through the Felix Fox Harris installation, if you'll walk that way, I invite you to spend some time at our Con Take Part gallery. We have some educational components, as well as some background information. We have a film that a filmmaker created about JOOYOUNG and her installation and the whole process. That's about 5.5 minutes. We also have a time lapse of Jules' installation there. You can spend some time. That's about 30 minutes, so you don't need to watch the whole thing. But spend some time there if you can.
And Anne said, thank you for coming and letting me talk.
Thank you for
having me here. And really, this is such a great resource for the community and for the artists, and such a great institution. And I think, for me, I positioned this talk against the work of Felix Fox Harris because there was such a kind of great opportunity to view everything in this one context. So, I appreciate it.
Thank you.